Welcome to BCE in what is turning out, I think we can agree, to be a challenging year for our industry, isn't it? Well, I want to talk to you today about why that is, and also, I think, about what we can do about it. But first, I would like to start by talking to you about the concept of time. Bear with me. Take this iron meteorite that I have here. It is 5 billion years old, which is pretty extraordinary, right? Well, to put that in perspective, time itself has only existed for 14 billion years since the beginning of existence, or the Big Bang. In other words, this meteorite has existed for over a third of time itself. A long time? Yes, of course it is, especially when you consider that our planet has only been around for 4.5 billion years, which means my meteorite has been around for 500 million years longer than Earth, and then spent another 4.5 billion years whizzing through space before crashing down through the atmosphere and landing in Argentina in 1576. And then 441 years later, it finds itself in Austin, Texas. So random, right? Well, I keep my meteorite around because I like the perspective it gives me on everyday tribulations, but also because I think it's nice, obviously, to surround oneself with things that are older than we are at our age, which is getting harder and harder at my age, I can tell you. But I'll tell you something else that's pretty old, and that is the industry that we work in, Telecom, which is 150 years old this year. And that is obviously represented here today by this beautiful but rather knackered Ericsson skeleton telephone. And the fact is, as an industry, we have had an extraordinary run through the last century and a half, through 2 world wars, the invention of flight, the development of nuclear power, multiple economic recessions and booms, constant increases in the need for both performance and reliability of voice, and then, of course, data communications. The telecom industry has kept the world's telecommunications networks live and profitable. Let's give ourselves a pat on the back for that. How did we do it? Well, we did it through culture. The telecom industry is the only one that I know of where direct competitors are happy to share profits from the patented innovations that they own. But we also did it, and this is really critical, with what I would describe as disciplined innovation, by which I mean that over the last 150 years, we have successfully developed a structured system for taking new technology innovations and turning them into innovations that can be implemented on time by a variety of competing vendors while still being interoperable and reliable and making money. And the first principles of this system are industry standards, which of course enable certification of products, which enable interoperability between products, which enable competition between different companies, which in turn drives the great wheel of innovation forward towards the next technology cycle. And of course, I think the best known current example of these principles in action are the G standards that we all know about, defining high-speed mobility, 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G. Which begs an important question. Why? Why, 4 years ago, when it came time to develop virtualization, which is arguably the most disruptive technology innovation since packet technology gave birth to the internet, did we simply, as an industry, abandon those principles in favor of just punting the responsibility for developing it over the fence to open source groups and industry consortia? Because the result of that decision, or I would say indecision, 4 years later, is this: chaos. This image is from the new Alien Covenant movie. It looks terrifying, doesn't it? But it's not as frightening as what's happening in telecom right now. Spending by service providers down, layoffs up, uncertainty is rife. Ladies and gentlemen, we are operating in an environment where one of the biggest and most respected telecom companies in the world, Ericsson, which has been around for 150 years, since the very start of the telecom industry itself, is in jeopardy because it can't make enough money from current technologies through the end of this decade. And in the midst of this, NFV virtualization, which was supposed to be the next big money saver and revenue generator, has instead just turned out to be a complete mess. 4 years after we started working on it, we still don't have any university accepted standards for NFV, and that means that there's no agreed way for companies to develop new services and applications and know that they can run on the virtualized infrastructure from other vendors. And it means that right now, service providers have no simple way, short of putting everything in a lab and testing it for millions of dollars, of telling if those third-party virtualized apps are going to work on their networks. It is not ideal. It's also really unnecessary. If we'd just stuck to our telecom guns and developed NFV in the way that we have every other revolutionary new technology in the last 150 years, from voice to mobile to IP, we would not be having this crisis today. But we so far have missed those essential steps: standards, certification, interoperability. So what went wrong? Well, we listened to some of the wrong people, many of whom had their own agendas or are outsiders who just didn't understand the needs of the telecom community. And I'm just going to tell you, I'm going to call it like I see it here. For me, the three guilty parties are the open source community. The good news is they have an unlimited number of good ideas. The bad news is they have an unlimited number of good ideas, but really no discipline, no closure to that creativity. This is almost innovation out of control. The second group I'm going to point the finger at, enterprise vendors. I mean, they said it was all so simple, didn't they? The future is a cloud. You know, enterprise vendors say we've been building enterprise cloud networks for ages, so we're just going to pile in, use that experience to start building telco cloud networks. Well, that turns out to be a spectacularly bad idea. And if you want to know how bad it is, talk to Telefonica about its experience with HPE last year. You know, they say it's not enough to succeed, others must fail. In HPE's case, I guess that means it's telecom customers. The third group, media, analyst community. In case you're still not sure, you know, I'll own up to this. I sit in the third bucket here, and I'll own my share of the blame. We in the media got super excited about the story being spun by the open source crowd and the enterprise players. I apologize for that. You know, together over the last few years, these three groups spun a vision of the telecom future that was both impossibly optimistic and wildly inaccurate. This is what they were slinging. You know, in the future, everything's virtual. Everything's a virtual or telco cloud. Telco and enterprise vendors sell products and services to CSPs and carriers that are both portable and interoperable. Networks won't really matter. The real money's in digital content and services. DevOps rules. Everything revolves around DevOps. And of course, open source saves the world. Well, in order to fix what has gone wrong in our industry, we need to start by refuting this conventional wisdom. We need to understand what CSPs, what service providers and carriers really need in order to have successful business outcomes. So I had a genius idea ahead of this show. Why don't we just ask carriers what they need? So that's what I did. I surveyed 150 Tier 1 service providers about their hopes and needs and aspirations for next-gen comms. It's one of the benefits of owning a market research company. And I think the results are pretty eye-opening. So what are the most important aspects of digital transformation if you're a service provider? Survey says, well, there you go. Virtualization is up there, of course, but number one is process automation, you know, which goes all the way back to a concept which was first put forward by Hussein Estenbolchi at AT&T with his concept of one at the start of this century, 17 years ago, if you remember that. You know, basically talking about a massive simplification of the software processes on carrier networks. So clearly, this is not just an area, it's the area where carriers need solutions, where they want help. But right now, we're just so over-rotated on NFV, aren't we? And yes, I know we have this new thing called the Open Network Automation Platform Group, but guess how long that's been around for? 2 months. And in a sense, that's 3.5 years too late. So, you know, and what about DevOps here? Supposed to be absolutely essential. Everything's going to work around DevOps. Not so much. Way down there in last place in terms of importance with the 150 Tier 1 carriers we spoke to. So I think we have some work to do here as an industry on our priorities. Okay, meantime, let's debunk some other assumptions. Telco cloud, this is the future of everything in telecom, right? Survey says. Well, about half of service providers would agree with that, but the same number either are just committed to doing something with it at some point, or they simply haven't worked out where it fits in their future strategy. So not quite as universal a level of support as many would have had us believe. And let's talk about the enterprise. Does the advent of cloud really open the door to enterprise vendors to start helping to build telco cloud networks? That's what Cisco, that's what HP, that's what Oracle, That's what Intel were all saying a couple of years ago. Survey says, no, service providers don't think so. Less than a quarter think enterprise vendors can absolutely do this. 70% say either maybe or ha ha ha, no way. Let's talk about open source. You know, there is just something about open source which captured the imagination of the telecom industry earlier this century. How important is it to telecom? Survey says, okay, well, our survey indicates that for a large part of our industry, the service providers, the love affair with open source is either over or never started. Yes, 44% of service providers think open source is essential, so that's nice. Over half think it's just okay or has limited application. I'll tell you, I'm in the 1.3% down the bottom here. I think the effect, not of open source code itself, nothing wrong with that, but of the way in which it is developed, you know, but never actually finished and developed, you know, all over the place with no control over that. I think that's had an absolutely toxic effect on the telecom industry and its current innovation cycle. In fact, I think it's safe to say that it's actually stalled us out right now. You know, why is that? Well, if you've never been involved in an open source project, the process can probably best be explained using an old joke. How many open source developers does it take to change a light bulb? Let's roll that video, and while that scrolls along, I'll dig into some specifics as to why our industry has stalled out this year. Biggest challenges to virtualization efforts. Our survey results showed that service providers clearly understand the primary causes of the disarray right now in our industry. Lack of interoperability, overabundance of NFV specs, too many specs, lack of standards, and guess what? These are all interrelated. Okay, the open source guys have finally finished changing their light bulb. Well, that's good, isn't it? Now you know why it's taken 4 years for us not to get open source NFV to work properly, right? Okay, what's the solution here? Well, in an ideal world, there would be a solution to this which was as simple as the technology is complicated. And I have good news. Fixing NFV right now doesn't require us to standardize and certify every single component of the virtualization taxonomy right now. So what is the key to unlocking the entire NFV technology and business ecosystem? Well, middleware is a possible solution, providing a jump-off point between the NFV infrastructure from companies like Ericsson and Huawei and ZTE and Adtran and everybody else, and the VNF services and applications. And lots of people, of course, are working on this. I mean, if we could get the entire industry to consolidate around using the same middleware, I mean, really, we would at one stroke have created interoperability between NFV solutions from different vendors, which would make possible a virtualization free market economy, free market technology economy, like the one that we had for IP and like the one that we had for Ethernet and that we have for mobile and everything else. And that free market could end up looking a little bit like this, a cloud-based telecom app store, or more likely stores, since once I think we break the seal on interoperability, I expect to see a huge flood of companies jumping in to provide these services, applications, and the marketplaces where they can be downloaded. And you know, these are just intentionally the equivalent of the consumer app stores that we all use to download apps onto our phone from the internet, but targeting CSP services. It's kind of a vision of the future, but it's really what NFV is supposed to enable. So middleware, that's one approach. The issue is getting everyone to agree on the same middleware at this point could be non-trivial. Maybe right now it's impossible. So what are we going to do? Well, there is another possible solution. You know, for the last year, I've been working with this organization called the NIA, the New IP Agency, on the problems with NFV. And I started that process by focusing on the NFVI vendors, because without their support, this really wasn't going to go anywhere. And, you know, it's extraordinary. I'm delighted to say that after a year, we have 100% support from every incumbent vendor of NFVI infrastructure. Cisco, Ericsson, Huawei, ZTE, Juniper, Nokia, Adtran, Adver, every single vendor is supporting our initiative to get NFV moving again. But who hasn't joined? Oracle, HPE, VMware, Intel, and I'd ask you to draw your own conclusions about their motivations and whether, in fact, those four companies are operating with the best interests of service providers at the moment. Anyway, at this event, I sat down with both all of the NFVI incumbents, but also the leading CSPs around the world, including BT and AT&T. And I made an interesting discovery. It transpires that leading carriers like BT have been creating what they call standardized service models, which essentially abstract out the complexity of NFV from the endpoint, the goal, which is new services and applications. And guess what? BT has defined 36 of these things, from everything from DSL to firewalls to everything else, to virtualized packet core, and they're just giving them away. They're saying to other service providers, if this is useful to you to move your business forward, help yourself. So what the NIA is going to do is create an online repository of these, cloud-based, obviously, and manage and update it. And I honestly think that that is a major move forward for the industry. I'd like to finish today where I started, with the concept of time. Yes, things are a mess right now in the comms industry. I assume you guys have realized this. People aren't really talking about it that much in the media, but if you live on the front line of it, you're certainly aware. But as an industry, we've been doing this for a very long time. My goodness, we were building telephone networks during the Great Depression when people were starving to death in America. So I think if we can survive that as an industry, we can get through this. But I do think we need to pull back from the tech complexity, and we need to get back to the first principles of telecom, the fundamentals, and triage the problem. With vigor, yes, but also with some discipline. And eventually, we need to have a path to standardize, certify, and interoperate in order to succeed. Okay, well, I'm delighted to be here at BCE, our big event for light reading and heavy reading and NIA. I'm looking forward to meeting many of you. I hope you'll come and find me. If you're interested in talking about how to move NFV forward, come and find us in the main hall where we have a demo. In the meantime, thank you for listening to me, and I'd like to introduce our wonderful conference chair, Carol Wilson. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen.